Today I want to talk about factions and factionalism. And it's been on my mind a lot lately, especially in the current political era in the United States, so let's get into it. So the idea of factions and factionalism is this idea that historically small groups within larger movements can fall prey to infighting, and that infighting can lead to a destruction of the larger movement or some harm to the larger movement. And in the United States in the past, as the Democrats have lost elections, there's been a lot of hand wringing within the party saying that we can't agree, we can't unite, that because gay people or trans people want their rights, they're not going to be able to agree with a black person in Atlanta who doesn't want their voting rights slipped away. Like this idea that these disparate groups cannot come together within a movement to make change, and that's why the Democrats have lost elections. And I've been thinking a lot about revolutionary movements. I've been thinking a lot about change and how change happens, how radical change happens, and how those who are pushing for change can win elections and can have successful revolutionary movements. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's thinking about this, but I think I have been concentrating on that in the post-Trump election period. And I think that the left blaming themselves for losing the election because they say that, we're doing too much intellectual purity, we are fighting too much amongst ourselves, we are asking for too much. All of this is a form of self-gaslighting. And the reality is what cost the Democrats the election in this cycle, what cost the Democrats the election in the 2016 election when Trump was elected, were the moderates. It was changing loyalties of the moderates. And in the revolutionary movements that I've been looking at, you include the moderates in those movements, and the moderates will sometimes switch sides. That's what happens. And I think we need to not self-gaslight into saying that we were somehow asking for too much in this election. We were not asking for too much. We were pandering too much to moderates who were not loyal to us. Let me give you an example. In the Mexican Revolution, 1910, Mexico was coming out of 30 years of dictatorship, the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz, the Porfiriato. And this dictatorship benefited Porfirio Diaz and his cronies and the wealthy in Mexico, who were wealthy landowners, very similar to what we saw in Spain. And the foreign investors who Porfirio Diaz brought into Mexico to modernize, to build factories, to build roads, to build railroads. That was who benefited, nobody else did. So there was a broad base of people within Mexico who were not happy with this dictatorship because it benefited very few people. The people who were not happy with the dictatorship were the rural farm laborers in the south under Emiliano Zapata, and the rural farm laborers in the north under Pancho Villa, and the industrial laborers in Ciudad de Mexico who had been unionizing, had been pushing for safer working conditions, for 8-hour workday, etc., etc. And the moderates of Mexico, who were the professionals, the intellectuals, the university professors, the artists. These were the folks who wanted a freer Mexico, and they wanted more political power, and they wanted, the right to free speech, the right to speak out against the government. But they wanted the other changes, like land reform, like labor reform, things like that, economic reform. They wanted those changes to happen slowly, and they wanted law and order. And so over the course of the 10 years of the Mexican Revolution, the factions that I talked about, the working poor in the cities, the farm laborers in the south and the north, and the moderates, all united to overthrow the Porfiriato and then later to overthrow another conservative coup that happened as well. And they succeeded in overthrowing both of these governments. But as soon as they did that, the moderates essentially broke ranks. And while the moderates did incorporate some of the reforms that the coalition that brought them to power wanted, they also betrayed the workers in the south and the workers in the north by assassinating Emiliano Zapata and Pancho Villa in the name of law and order. Now, in their defense, Emiliano Zapata and Pancho Villa did not agree with the pace of reforms in the government, and Emiliano Zapata specifically probably would never have disbanded his army because he was just that kind of guy. He was he was just true to his cause and true to the people that he was fighting for. Pancho Villa, at the time that he was assassinated, had stepped down as head of the army. He didn't agree with the government, but he had decided to stop fighting. So both of these were extrajudicial. They were just in the name of law and order. And a similar thing happened in the Spanish Republic and the Spanish Civil War, which is that the rate of change, even though there were moderates who supported the Republic, the rate of change would have been disturbing to some. The fact that there was some violence that was not adequately addressed by the government would have been disturbing to them. And the thing about moderates in these revolutionary movements that I have noticed is that they will abandon a government that has some flaws and has had some destabilizing effects, but has also done a lot of good and could be worked with to be reformed, if someone comes in and says they're going to restore law and order. Like, they will literally sell their grandmother for law and order. And it doesn't seem to matter that the people coming in and promising law and order have a really bad track record on like human rights and like empathy and like competence and like democracy. Like, it doesn't seem to matter to moderates. Like, they will tell themselves that the people who are coming in to restore law and order are going to be reasonable, even if they have a history of not being reasonable. So I think what we have to do in the United States, and this is just one woman's opinion, is we have to, on the left, make a compelling case for the world that we want to see and insist on it. And we need to build the coalitions that we have been building and do the hard work of talking things out and listening to people when they let us know what their problems are, and finding solutions that will work for most people, that will hold those in power who exploit most of the citizens of the United States accountable, hold corporations accountable, hold billionaires accountable, hold people who pollute rivers accountable, hold people who abuse others accountable. I think we have to build that. And then when the right crashes and burns, we will build that world and the moderates will come, because at that point we will seem more reasonable. But unfortunately, the moderates will not side with us until we seem more reasonable than the other side. And most of the time, because of gaslighting, because of propaganda, because of reactive abuse, we do not seem more reasonable.